Well, here at St Mary's we have some amazing and wonderful architecture and some amazing and wonderful carvings. Throughout the building there are all sorts of strange and peculiar creatures and also some beautiful and very sweet animals. Included in them, of course, is our very, very famous white rabbit here. This rabbit was carved in the 1300s and was the marking point of the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela. He carries on his bag a shell that represents that he is actually a pilgrim, and we often call him the pilgrim hare here at St Mary's, but visitors know him differently. They think of him as the white rabbit. The white rabbit who inspired Alice in Wonderland. So if you remember the story where little Alice follows the rabbit as he bounces along and goes down the hole into Wonderland, you will know the story that I'm talking about. And so it is such a joy when our welcomers are able to welcome people and tell them the story of this wonderful white rabbit. But the thing you need to know is there are lots more creatures, animals and carvings around this building that are often overlooked. It is like a treasure trove. You can find dragons and you can find owls, you can find dogs and you can find bears. There is even a unicorn hidden in this building. So keep your eyes open and share the wonderful stories of this building with those who visit. Well, a very warm welcome to St Michael's Chapel. This was built in the 14th century and it is such a wonderful piece of Gothic architecture. It is really, really stunning. If you're here, you will see that the kind of trunks and the columns fan out to almost a canopy above us, reflecting a kind of foliage or the sense of being in a forest somewhere. It is the most intricately and beautifully carved ceiling that is said to have inspired places like York Minster. And around us in this chapel, we are blessed with some stunning windows telling the story of St Paul as well. Such fine quality work and such beauty, it is awe-inspiring. And if you come to this part of the chapel, you'll be able to see above your head a little face, and that face is said to be Ivar de Rothen, the architect who helped design this part of church, and he humbly wanted to leave his own face in the stonework so people could remember that he was involved. As you enter this chapel, as you walk through into this space, you will find St Michael and slaying a dragon, and it is the colours and the energy that it evokes that are so stunning and beautiful. And people pause here, they pray here, they're still here, and sometimes they're just overwhelmed by the beauty of this place. Other times they want to talk about the history and the background and why this building is so full of these precious and beautiful pieces of carving. And so if you are a welcomer here at St Mary's, we hope you will find the opportunity to explore something of St Michael's Chapel as well as the main body of the church building as well. And so the windows in St Mary's Beverley are spectacular. There are the great windows at the east and west end that were designed by Pugin, and they tell the stories of the life of Christ. In the north transept we have some beautiful windows, but very, very plain. And in the south transept of our church we have windows that even capture the moment of the lions surrounding Daniel in the den. But I want to tell you a little bit about these windows because they are very special. These windows here in St Michael's Chapel are the story of St Paul, and it might be helpful for you when you're showing people around to be able to talk a little bit about these windows in case people ask you about them. The first window, as you can see behind me, depicts St Paul. He has been somebody who has been a follower of the Jewish tradition, and he has been fervent in his faith, and he is very, very opposed to this new Christian business that is going on. He has decided that they've got it wrong, that they've misjudged the situation, and thinks of those who are following Jesus as being heretics. So much so that when Stephen is stoned, the first Christian martyr, it is Paul whose cloak is left there as a symbol of him being involved in this. At that point in the story, he's called Saul, not Paul. But this window depicts the moment when his name changes to Paul, when he is overcome by a vision of Christ. He falls off his horse and he meets the risen Lord, and he chooses to become a Christian. And then the next window tells us a little bit more about what then happens to Paul, because then Paul becomes a preacher and a teacher sharing the good news. And so he stands at a place that is dedicated to an unknown God in Athens. And he says to the people around him, look, you created this place for an unknown God, and you are so wise and you have such wisdom and such poetry, and there is so much to learn from you. But what you haven't realized is that this unknown God is the God we know in Jesus Christ, in whom we live and move and have our being. And so it's a really special moment in Paul's life. Now, Paul is captured. He's going to be sent to Rome to be tried, and in 60 AD he is involved in a shipwreck. He's shipwrecked at Malta, and in his ship there are 276 people who survive this extraordinary tragedy, really. They survive, and he goes on, as we can see in the final window, to tell people about the Christian story, and he brings healing and he protects them from harm. And so we have throughout our building these most extraordinary windows, but windows that tell incredible stories from the Bible, stories that mean and have great significance for many of us today. But even if you're not a Christian, you don't share the faith, perhaps you can appreciate the beauty and the craftsmanship of these windows, and perhaps you might just encounter this story in a new way. And so here in St Mary's Beverley, in this beautiful Gothic, stunning architecture, there are lots of hidden treats as well. And above this ceiling here in St Michael's Chapel is a real treat. It's a hidden room. We often refer to it as the priest's room. Unfortunately, we can't keep it open all the time, but if you are welcoming visitors to church, you might like to tell them a little bit about this and let them know when it is open, because on special days we are able to open this room. So if you'd like to follow me, we're going to go up behind the retro choir, up a spiral staircase, and we're going to find the most extraordinary treasure trove of fascinating objects from Beverley's past, and of course from St Mary's past as well. Well, here we are in the priest's room, and it is an extraordinary place to be. It was built in about 1320, and it's full of incredible architecture. I mean, the beams in the ceiling themselves are extraordinary, and you can imagine the history that they've witnessed. In this space, which probably was used for visiting priests, but was possibly used also for stonemasons as a drawing floor, so they could plan out the building as it developed. It's been used for Sunday school, for youth group, for all sorts of things. In this space, there are gathered all sorts of treasures and objects from history of both St Mary's and, of course, the town. And this space isn't the only space up here. Through the door over there, there's another little room with all sorts of fascinating things in it. And I'd just like to draw your attention to a couple of things that are in this space that people might find really, really interesting. And so if you'd like to follow me, because over here we have some of the original panels of the Ceiling of Kings. And on them you can see the monarch holding his sword, his crown on his head, and just imagine the history that they've witnessed. And what always amazes me is how big these are, because when you're in church looking up such a high ceiling, they look like they're tiny, but here they are, right for us to see and to know that actually the restorations that have happened at St Mary's have been incredibly accurate, because these are incredibly faithful to the paintings that we have on our ceiling. And so from national history we move to very personal history. This is the parish bier, which would have carried those who perhaps couldn't afford more grand ways of carrying their loved ones. And next to it, something incredibly precious and extraordinary is the Maiden's Garland. This is dedicated to Elizabeth Eleanor in 1680, and she was just 21 years old when she died. It would have been filled with flowers and perhaps with her gloves. It would have been carried before her as she made her way into church, and it would have been a memory that was held here in church to cherish her and to give thanks for her. Alongside these very precious and beautiful moments in people's individual lives, there was the community life of the church. And here we have in this stonework what's believed to be a very early signature, one of the earliest signatures of a chap called Ivan de Rorto, who helped design part of church. And it is extraordinary to think that this survives even today. And as we move on, we'll see elements from the town's history as well. So we have here the stocks, which were used as punishment for those who'd committed crimes, and they might seem incongruous in church. In fact, I really think they are, but nonetheless they're here and we have to care for them. And the skull's bridle, of course, which was used to punish those who were thought to be lying or perhaps telling untruths about others, perhaps gossiping. So there is all sorts of extraordinary history here. There are also the things that represent some of the development of the church, from the bosses that were on the roof that have now come away, but show us something of the history of the place, and carved out of wood, and probably carved, we believe, many of them by women. And the weather vane that was designed by Pugin, the design of which was found on his deathbed. And so some really precious history that is both very personal and local, but also of national importance and national significance. In the little room through there we'll find some ironwork that was used to rest muskets on during the Civil War. And all of this, including the lantern towers which housed the lamps that are here to guide people across the Westwoods safely, to cross the pasture land to the town, so they could be inside the town's walls. They're all precious memories of those who have seen and witnessed to life's events here in this place. And so if you do get the opportunity to talk about the priest's room, please do feel free, and imagine perhaps what people throughout the ages have seen and experienced in this place, and why this place has become so important that they've invested their time and their energy and their creativity and their resources into it, and we give thanks for it. In 2012 we realised that we needed to undertake a huge restoration campaign, and we started the work for that, and by 2020 it was a real privilege to be able to unveil the work that had been done on the north side clerestories in the main body of the church. One of the things that we were able to do when we repaired that stonework was to add the carvings that had long since eroded and were no longer identifiable. And so we were able to add something that was meaningful for us today, but also in keeping with the building. After a lot of prayer and consideration, we came up with the idea of the Chronicles of Narnia. And so if you're showing visitors around church, you might want to point them out to people. Here at the back of church, we have the models that we used, created to become templates for the real carvings. And so the real carvings are outside on the north side of church, but here you can see the plaster casts that helped the sculptures as they started their carvings. And we often get asked, well, why Narnia? Why Aslan? Why the Chronicles of Narnia? Everybody knows The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, but perhaps they don't always know that these stories are connected to the Christian faith. Aslan represents Jesus, and if you know the story of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe well, you will know that in order to satisfy the White Witch's demands for sacrifice, for penance, Aslan takes the place of Edmund and is killed on the stone table, only, of course, to rise again 3 days later, clearly echoing the Christian gospel. And C.S. Lewis was really clear about his own Christian faith and how these stories connected with the Christian faith. And so you will see on the display behind me the different characters that we were able to add to the building. We have everybody from Reepicheep, the fierce but brave 3-foot mouse that appears in books like The Voyage of the Dawn Treader and The Last Battle. We have, of course, Mr. Tumnus, who is so well known, Lucy's friend, and in our sculptures he's being turned to stone by the White Witch who's next to him. We have the badger, who is the record keeper. We have the owl, who offers wisdom. And of course, to explain and to be able to tell each of their stories would take far longer than we have now, but you as welcomers, if you'd like to familiarise yourselves with the stories of Narnia, and then you'll be able to tell people about each of these characters and what they mean. And perhaps those who are visiting might just point them out and go away having said, do you know what, today I met Aslan. And so here we are in the chancel of St Mary's, and isn't it spectacular? Just take a moment to look at the window behind me, and in front of it the screen at the altar here with the depiction of the Last Supper. Such a beautiful part of this church, and so intimate, because in this little section here we have the misericords, the carved seating around the outside, which makes it its own kind of special chapel. And if you were to look up to the ceiling, you would see the kings that are represented in the 40 panels above us, each of them representing a different reign, and with recorded their name, their place and the date of their burial as well. And these kings were painted in 1446, and Henry VI was still alive while this particular ceiling was being painted. But of course, those who know this church well will know that there were too many panels and not enough kings, and so 3 of the kings here are really just tribal leaders. They were never proper kings of England. The 4th that was left with a tribal leader was actually replaced by King George VI, and so we have a more modern interpretation there. But to come here and to witness in this place the history and beauty of our country and of course our faith is really special, and people love coming here. It was a reminder, of course, that the King's authority does not exceed that of God's, but also a reminder of the rich history and the legacy upon which we build from generation to generation. The misericords, these prayer seats around the edge here, were used to make it look like they were standing when actually they were perching on the edge, because prayers were often very, very long and drawn out affairs. These misericords date from the 1400s and they have all sorts of things carved on them, from representations of Bible stories, as you might expect, but also representations of an archer who may be connected with the idea of an early Robin Hood, to an elephant whose feet have proper toes, which was really unique at the time because people thought that elephants probably had the kind of hooves that horses have. And alongside that are all sorts of different faces. And imagine for a moment the people who have sat in these stalls, who have prayed in them, who have rubbed their hands along the beautiful woodwork and the history that they hold. And when people are being welcomed to our church, we would love it if church welcomers would explain to them something of that history and use their imagination to imagine the generations that have gone before us and who have found this place remarkable and special too. And so in 2022 we were able to do some more of the restoration work here at St Mary's, and in the south clerestories, which is the main part of church in the nave, there was a huge amount of stonework that needed repair, and as part of that, those carvings that had eroded completely needed replacing. We have no idea what had been there before. We know there was at least one dog, but that was about it, and what was able to be saved was saved. But it gave us the incredible opportunity to be able to add some carvings that were relevant to our own time and place. And a couple of years previously, we'd been able to add the characters from the Narnia Chronicles, representing the Christian faith and, of course, echoing all the different animals that are already in the building. This time we asked people what they'd like to see upon that side of church, and time again, some of our children and young people said, we'd really like to see some ladies, because you've got all of the kings on the ceiling, but none of the queens. And so we thought hard and we talked and we consulted with others, and we found that actually there were some extraordinary women, both internationally and more locally, who could well deserve a place on the clerestories there. And so having done some research and having thought carefully about it, we came up with women who had been under-recognised. Many of them had connections with Beverley. Mary Wollstonecraft, the great philosopher and author, had lived in Beverley for a time as a young person. And of course, Amy Johnson lived just down the road from us, the great aviator. We also had Hilda Lyons, who was brought up near here, whose skill as an engineer was massively overlooked, but yet she was the person who really was responsible for the submarine shape, which was an incredible feat of engineering and is highly celebrated across the world, but so often she was overlooked. And so we wanted to be able to include figures who had been important and who had made a difference and perhaps hadn't been recognised for that. And of course, we wouldn't be able to do our job properly without including the first woman bishop, Libby Lane, who also lived in Beverley for a time. Helen Sharman, who was, of course, the first British astronaut, whose family come from this region as well. And so it was a great gift to be able to put them on the building, and to be able to share that with visitors is such an important thing, because the church isn't set in one period of history. The building continues to evolve and to grow, as it has done in every generation. And so we are delighted with our women of influence, and it can be really fun to imagine with people who they might like to have put up there if they'd had the opportunity. So we are delighted that you're interested in being a welcomer at St Mary's, or perhaps you've been one for a long time, or perhaps you'd just like to know a bit more about the church. Well, here you see the splendour and the wonder of the building in the nave, with this extraordinary ceiling with stars throughout the building, capturing the night sky, and just the right light is spectacular to see them, the gleaming gold above you. Here in this beautiful nave, which has witnessed so much from people's births to their weddings to their funerals, it's walked alongside them in their faith's journey, and of course been a place where the community has gathered over centuries. You'll find all sorts of wonderful and extraordinary little things, not least the minstrel's pillar, which has carved in it those musicians from the medieval time who helped pay for the rebuilding of this building when it collapsed in the 1500s. There are also the wives of Beverley, the ladies who helped contribute. Very rare for women to be recognised, but they are here in this building. And there are carvings of kings, maybe Henry VIII, who knows, we can't always identify all of them, and the wonderful bosses, 620 plus of them, describing life throughout the eras, particularly the Tudor and the medieval times. It is such a grand and beautiful space, but it's also a place with wonderful acoustics, and so it's very much alive today for worship and for our congregations together, but also for concerts and for activities and for school visits. And so when people visit St Mary's, we'd love you to tell them that this is a living church, a place that is very much part of the community of Beverley, and of course was traditionally thought of as being the town's church with much pride. And so when you welcome people to St Mary's, do feel able to celebrate and give thanks, not just for what's gone before, but also for what's happening now as well. And so here we are in a Holy Trinity Chapel here at St Mary's in Beverley, and if you get the opportunity to show people around, you might like to talk about the ceiling, which, as we'd expect here at St Mary's, is covered in stars. But this ceiling was completed in 1865 and cost about £120 at the time. It depicts the northern hemisphere, so you can pick out the constellations, the planets, and of course the sun and moon. When, with perhaps a little bit of imagination, St Mary's sent pictures of it to the Royal Observatory, they commented that perhaps a little bit too much poetic license was used to make it anything like accurate, but nonetheless it captures the beauty of the heavens, and so do encourage people to look up here. In addition to that, if we look over on the roof as it meets the walls, we see these incredible carvings and painted depictions of musicians carrying their strange and unusual instruments, bagpipes, flutes, all sorts of things. So do look out for them as well, because you will find an awful lot of hidden people and some angels as well within the roof and the ceiling of St Mary's.